Content warning. This podcast episode contains discussions of a sensitive nature that may be triggering for some individuals.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. My name is Dee Moore, and I am a kidney warrior. This podcast is dedicated to encourage, educate, and inspire as we explore all aspects of kidney disease, related chronic illnesses, and health. If you have any questions or ideas for topics you would like me to cover, please get in contact with me on social media using the handle Diary of a Kidney Warrior. In today's episode, I am bringing you a kidney warrior story. Now, there's always something you can learn from someone's story, something that can bring inspiration and hope. My guest today from Derbyshire, England, is Kevin Moulton. Kevin joins me to share about his remarkable 30-year kidney transplant story and the lessons he has learned along his kidney warrior journey. Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Kevin?
I'm really well, thanks, Dee. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm excited about the interview, and everybody knows what I'm about to say because I say it every time, but sincerely do mean I'm excited to record a Kidney Warrior story interview because, as I always say, and it's so true, it is so powerful to learn from someone's lived experience of chronic kidney disease. So yes, very excited about our interview. And without further ado, I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is, how did your kidney warrior journey begin and how were you diagnosed?
It began in 1986 when I was 8 years old. I'd basically got E. coli poisoning from a joint of beef that we'd had for a family Sunday dinner, which led to a disease called HUS, which hemolytic uremic syndrome. So I obviously presented with vomiting, diarrhea, and local GP sort of thing. And I was admitted to the local hospital. Now, I grew up in an army town called Catterick Garrison, so this was an army hospital, not an NHS hospital. And so it didn't really have an emergency department, and they did very basic operations, though, could take your tonsils out, that kind of thing, or fix a broken leg. But I went there to the local hospital, and they diagnosed me with appendicitis. So I had my appendix removed, and sort of shortly after, obviously, they must have monitored my blood results, that kind of thing, and realised that, he's something else going on here, and he's got renal failure. So needless to say, I didn't have appendicitis, but I just took it out for the fun of it, I think. But so then I was transferred to the Newcastle's Royal Victoria Infirmary, and obviously I was very ill, 3 months I was in hospital, possibly 4, on dialysis. Obviously, they were working to get my kidney function stable to sort of treat the disease, or should I say, like the poisoning, I guess, from the E. coli. That kind of thing, and to obviously stabilize my body. It did also infect my bowel, which we'll perhaps go on to later, and that's a little bit further down the line, but it really ravaged my body. And I think the other thing as well, my sister at the time, she was 5 years old, and she came into hospital when I was in hospital, the army hospital, first being treated. The day after, we're in adjacent rooms, and I could see there's a little window, and you could see each other. So she contracted the same E. coli poisoning, basically. But luckily for her, they sort of, by the time they'd been around me, they'd sort of figured out what was going on, so they could treat her straight away. I believe she had plasma transfusions, and thankfully for her, she didn't have renal failure. I think mainly because I presented my symptoms first, and they had an opportunity to sort of realise what had happened, basically. So I transferred to Newcastle Royal Victoria Infirmary, and then a great consultant called Malcolm Coulthard. He's retired now, but he's an absolute fantastic man. He obviously looked after my treatment all the way up until I left paediatrics. I think I was 18 when I left paediatrics. So I hung on for as long as possible. So that's basically how I contracted kidney disease and, what happened initially.
Rewinding back slightly. So you were in hospital 3-4 months and you started dialysis. I'm assuming haemodialysis they put you on?
They put me on hemodialysis. It was just for a short period, so perhaps like a month or two. I think just to stabilize things and try and get things going. And so obviously after I completed my treatment, obviously they basically said I'm going to need a kidney transplant in the future, no matter what. My kidneys are going to deteriorate. I had renal failure. I don't know what stage it was at the time, but I was obviously follow the diet. I'm sure many listeners who have renal failure are familiar with, no potassium, no salt kind of thing. And as a child, 8 years old until for several more years until I had my transplant, it's difficult. And I'm sure lots of parents who have children with renal failure, they know difficult it is because obviously kids are naturally obviously attracted towards sweets and crisps and salty foods, pizza and that kind of thing. So it was a struggle. Looking back, I think I sort of took it in my stride a little bit and accepted it, but it was a struggle.
So you were on dialysis for a month and then managed your kidney failure through diet. So in terms of your everyday life, how did kidney disease impact your childhood?
I was always a small child and very, very sort of underweight almost. And I think the restrictive diet didn't help that. I think I would have bulked out a little bit more. And I believe it may have sort of stunted my growth a little bit. Because I was the smallest child in the class. I was always the skinniest child in the class. But I was very energetic as a child. And after my diagnosis, I still played sports as normal, still played out with friends entirely normal. And I was full of energy and, and say on sports day or PE at school, I'd be like in the middle of the class, I wouldn't be the slowest, I wouldn't be the fastest. So in that respect, I led a normal sort of childhood, kind of thing. I mean, initially when I first came out, I did have a long line in. Mother would have to flush it out once a day, and that was kept in case things went pear-shaped, and I could, immediately go back on dialysis, kind of thing. Lots of medications to take, and as a child, I struggled with taking the medications. I preferred tablet form as opposed to medicine. I remember I used to have a carry-on every morning, at least half an hour before school, trying to get my tablet down me. And that must have been quite challenging for my mum thinking back. But it wasn't a nice experience for myself either, didn't enjoy it. But yeah, it's a childhood, but besides them sort of things, it was very, very normal. And I was lucky to have them years until my sort of kidneys started to fail even further and had to go back on dialysis at age 15. I'm grateful for them 7 years of sort of normality. It could have been very different. I could have been waiting for a transplant during that time. Could have affected my life a lot more negatively.
So you had those years between 8 and 15 where your kidney disease was managed via diet, and then unfortunately at 15 your kidney function declined further and you started dialysis again. Were you on haemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis?
I was on haemodialysis. As I mentioned earlier, I ended up having some small bowel removed. And at the time, I think it was decided that PD wasn't going to work for me. So I'd had a fistula put in when I was in hospital originally in 1986. Third attempt, so I've got 3 scars to show for that. But that was working. So things were in place for me to eventually go on dialysis and things. So it was in October 1994, my GCSE year at school, so my final exams, and I was back on hemodialysis 3 times a week. Well, they sort of tested my dad to see if he was a compatible donor and geared him up to donate a kidney to me.
And how was that workup process preparing for living donation?
Because I knew that my dad was going to be giving me a kidney and we had a date, it was going to be the January, I coped well on dialysis, so I knew it was temporary. Even though I missed a lot of schooling, I missed 3 days a week at school. That was obviously out of 5, so it did affect my GCSE results and that kind of thing. But it was okay, and we as a family we met a renal psychologist, obviously to make sure that they were I guess so the family was stable and all the relationships, and obviously when anyone has a major operation, things unfortunately can go wrong sometimes. And what would happen if that happened, and how would the family cope, and would there be resentment? We even went into, do I resent my sister that I had renal failure and she didn't end up with renal failure? Which is something I'd never even crossed my mind until that point, but it's a fair thing to explore, I think. Yeah, so obviously my dad had his build-up tests and date was given. I think it's January the 13th, 1995.
So you had your transplant date, it came, and what happened next?
Well, I remember I was extremely nervous and scared prior to the operation. I think sort of a few days before. I remember wanting to run away from the hospital to, I don't know why, but I just wanted to escape from everything. I was obviously very apprehensive, very scared. I'd lived a very non, I dislike using the word normal, but it's the best way I can describe it. A stable life for 7 years before that. And almost every day put it out of my mind that I had renal failure because it didn't impact me that much. Besides having to take medication and go to the hospital for a blood test every 6 weeks, it didn't impact my life at all. And so not suddenly, but to go from that to the realization, going to have a kidney transplant. Obviously, you're told of the medication you're going to be taking, what's going to be happening afterwards. You're going to have a draining, you're going to have a catheter. Will it work? Obviously, if it doesn't work, will I be in a worse off position than I was because I've had a major surgery and that kind of thing? Will my dad be okay? That kind of thing as well. And my dad's a very reserved person, and I think he's quite uncomfortable in like a hospital or like a public environment. And so I felt a little bit sort of sad for him. In that sounds probably the wrong word, but I really felt for him. That sort of thing. I know how uncomfortable it would have been. Obviously, want to do it because it's his child, and anyone would do that. But I know it would just not as plain sailing for him as you might expect. So yeah, so obviously, I remember we went to the cinema the night before as a family. My mum, my dad, and myself. We went to watch a movie in Newcastle city centre, just I think to take our mind off things, and then obviously prep for surgery in the morning. And yeah, things went extremely well. Mr. Ross Taylor did the surgery, so I think anybody who's sort of been treated in the Newcastle area will have heard of that gentleman. He's unfortunately passed away now, but I think he's like a pioneer transplant surgeon. I think he probably will stand corrected, but I think he's one of the first surgeons to perform a renal transplant in the UK, and he's very highly regarded. I speak to consultants now when I go to the current hospital. When they realise I've been to Newcastle, they're like, "Oh, did you know?" Everybody knows him. He's a tremendously skilled man. Yeah, so I had my transplant, and things went really well, quite luckily.
So the journey that you had to this point as a family, having the support of a renal psychologist to help you through that process, how important would you say that was for you?
I think it's extremely important because it made me, obviously I can't speak for my parents or my sister, but it made me think of things just a little bit differently, and it made me realize that, we're a secure family. It made me realize that my sister was ill as well and she got better and I didn't, but it also gave me the confidence that, as we all sat around talking, that my parents were fully on board and committed to my father donating me a kidney. Like family dynamic is different. There could be people out there who don't want their husband. It's as not nice that sounds. Just think, would I lose my husband? That kind of thing. I think so. Yeah. So it was really important, and obviously it's not just psychologists. Obviously, dietitians incredibly important, and obviously all the other support staff. The renal sister, Jean Sharp, she was amazing. She was there throughout my sort of 10 years as a pediatric patient. Yeah.
So in terms of the difference donation made to your life, what difference did receiving that transplant make to your life?
It was just incredible. I mean, as soon as I had the transplant and I was up and out of bed and sort of being discharged and I could you have an operation, you're a bit groggy for a few days and a week or whatever. Since I have energy back, I had more energy than I ever had in my life, but I didn't realize how much energy I didn't have before. So when I talked about my childhood being, I was a very active child, that kind of thing, I did not know how much energy I was missing. So just full of energy, full of life. Obviously, the medication, the side effects and things were pretty horrendous, but I didn't have to be on dialysis anymore, obviously. I could eat what I wanted as a 15-year-old is quite an important part of life. And yeah, and I just felt really healthy and really energetic. And obviously there's a lot of stress and worry. Will something go wrong? Obviously I'm going for bloods initially, obviously every day. And then it would be like, every twice a week, once a week, till eventually, until it tapers off. But there was that worry, but I was just full of life, full of energy and energy. As I say, that I never thought I could be that energetic, to be honest.
So I like to have a balanced view when it comes to the podcast. And as much as we cover things that are positive, I like to also be realistic and prepare people for what could possibly happen as well in terms of things that aren't so positive. So you mentioned about the medication and there being side effects. What side effects were you experiencing?
I had massive weight gain. So, as I said earlier, I was a very skinny sort of child. And at 15, I was still thin and skinny. And I gained a lot of weight, seemingly overnight, but obviously over a period of a few weeks. How can I put it? I went from being a skinny person to an overweight person. And I can imagine it's even worse if somebody is originally perhaps medium build, they'll have more of an impact, if that makes sense. Obviously, even though I was 15, my facial hair hadn't started growing and it started growing, side effects from the medication. I mean, as a male, that didn't bother me, but I can obviously appreciate as a female, it would be not very nice at all. I would have mood swings. I would be hungry all the time, just constantly hungry. Could never be full. I'd be up in the middle of the night making myself a sandwich, just famished, and that's a side effect of the medication as well. But I would say, I mean, at the time you don't realize it, but obviously all these medications, things are going fine. They get lowered gradually over a period of time, and this initial weight gain and mood swings and constant hunger. I'd say it probably only lasted a couple of months because perhaps I can't remember now because it was 30 years ago, but steroids probably halved dose by then because and yeah, but there was pretty horrendous and obviously immunocompromised. So initially you're not really supposed to go out in public, mix with too many people, it's infections. I remember quite early on I got glandular fever and so I had to go back into hospital to get antibiotics on a drip. Obviously treated straight away with strong antibiotics. So because I was immunocompromised to that extent. So it's like things like little things like that would be a little bit of a pain. So yeah, so it did affect me quite a bit. I didn't like the way I looked. Hair was constantly greasy, no matter how much I washed it. Bad skin, spots, and that kind of thing. And I know sort of every teenager gets spots anyway, but this was horrendous. And it did actually continue into adulthood, to at least in my early 30s. I used to have, really bad skin. But saying that, everyone's body is different. Everyone's side effects will be different. The side effects do not last forever. And I think that's a lot of things in life. I think when you're going through a negative situation or something that you don't like, I've always thought this doesn't last. This isn't forever. It is going to change. And obviously it does because your medication gets lowered and the side effects are a lot less severe. And obviously having a functioning kidney sort of outweighs any of that by, tenfold.
So as they lowered the dose of the medication, did things like the weight gain reduce and were you able to then lose weight?
Yes. So the weight gain reduced and I think, I didn't put an active effort into losing weight. I didn't check my diet. I didn't do any more exercise. It was just obviously the reduction in medication, you lose the weight. So yeah, so I was still bulkier than normal. And I think that if I wasn't still on the medication now, I think I'd have a little bit less weight on me. But this is a huge difference. I ballooned when I come out of the transplant, but then as it tapered off, I lost a fair bit of weight. My hair, greasy hair, sort of improved. My skin got a bit better, but it was continued to be an issue into adulthood. I mean, I saw a dermatologist in the end, and now it's sort of more or less okay, but it used to be pretty horrendous, kind of thing. And yeah, I think definitely, as the medication gets lowered, all the side effects and you lose the weight and things just sort of slowly calm down a bit.
So for someone listening who's due to have a transplant and may be concerned about side effects, for example, you mentioned about weight gain or the effect on their skin, what advice do you have for them in terms of being able to cope with things like that?
I think if you go into it with the knowledge that you are more than likely, probably almost certainly going to gain weight after the medication or the steroids, I think acceptance is a big part. But also, it's, as I say, it's not forever. So I'm even reluctant to say when you're back on your feet after the operation, exercise more, eat better. I don't think it has that much of an impact, if that makes sense. It's the actual medication side effects are causing this. So obviously that would be a good thing to do, but I don't think it'd have much of an impact. So it's just basically it's time. Basically, you need to just sort of be patient and understand that your weight gain, you will lose the weight eventually as the medication comes down, and you'll notice a difference in your energy levels. You'll notice a difference in you'll no longer have to be on dialysis. So obviously the weight gain is a huge negative, and then that negative will impact people in different ways. But obviously the benefits of having a renal transplant, a functioning kidney, obviously far outweigh putting on a couple of stone, I think. So yeah, definitely.
So you've had your kidney for 30 years now, and I think that is absolutely amazing that you've maintained your kidney for so long, and long may it continue and that you stay healthy. And with this in mind, how have you maintained your kidney? I mean, what tips do you have for anyone listening to keep that kidney going and keeping healthy?
Well, first of all, I was extremely lucky that the kidney I received from my dad is an extremely close match. So yeah, I've got that going for me already. So I'm extremely lucky in that regard. In terms of keeping it going and things, I don't stress about it. I go for a lot of time not even thinking about renal failure, thinking that I've had a kidney transplant. I just go through life as, I won't use that word again, but as steady as possible. In them 30 years, I've never missed a dose of my medication. I try to take it roughly at the same time every day. And if I only take medication on the morning now, so it's quite good. But I take it every time, try and take it every time in the morning, but I don't stress if it's a couple of hours later or a couple of hours before. It is what it is. But taking your medication is obviously the big thing, and not forgetting, not thinking, I'll just lower the dose myself because I feel like it for whatever reason. Take the doctor's advice. Obviously, attend all the appointments. Don't be afraid to question your consultant. Ask questions, clarification. Nothing worse than going home after a consultation and thinking, I wish I'd said that, or what did they mean by that? Ask for different things around things and stuff. And just, I can't sit here and say, oh, I'm super fit and I've never drank alcohol, I've never smoked, I've never done risky things, because I've done all those things. And some listeners might be appalled that someone with a kidney transplant has acted like that. But so to me, it's like, obviously it's important to be healthy, to eat properly and stay hydrated and things. But I think not to just stress about it too much and just live life. You've only got one life, and when you have a transplant, you've got a second lease on life. So I think it's best just to sort of enjoy it, basically, within reason. But yeah, so I think, just, as I say, I've been extremely lucky. I've sort of maintained things like as a younger, I've stayed away from confrontations and fights and things. That sounds a little bit silly, but when you're like 16, 17, 18-year old and you're going out, you see fights in pubs and things. And, just because, you get kicked in your kidney site or punched or something, it could obviously damage your kidney and stuff. So just remembering them sort of things, I've just been a little bit wary, I guess. But besides that, it's just I've just been extremely lucky, to be honest with you, Dee.
So we've talked about how the donation was for yourself, and clearly 30 years later, your kidney is doing well. I wanted to ask, how is your dad doing?
He's doing really well. He's 74 years of age now, pretty much fit as a fiddle. And he's had no complications, obviously, since donating the kidney. His renal function's absolutely fine. I believe, anyway, that we can sort of function on one fully working. Oh, well, obviously we can. But he's absolutely fine. No complications from the donating the kidneys. Obviously lived to the rest of 30 years of his life with no complications. So it proves that obviously there's no long-term effects from donating a kidney. I remember at the time he was quite sore and things after the operation. He was in more pain than I was, I think. But he's the donor, so I think they just cut him open and whip it out and not bother sew him back up and his job's done. So obviously he had to have time off work, and he was obviously. I never really thought about this until now, but obviously my mum would have been there for me, seeing me every day, and then obviously and supporting me and things that I needed. Dad would have been pretty much on his own, and then obviously discharged sooner than I was to go and recuperate at home. And I just sort of realised he must have been by himself, kind of thing, with no sort of support or help around the house. Yeah, so it's a very brave thing to do, I think. And I think from a relationship point of view, I think, it must have been quite stressful and put a real strain on their relationship, especially when I first became ill. Obviously, growing up in Catterick and the hospital was in Newcastle, that's an hour away. We didn't have a car as a child, so my mum was staying in Sunderland nearby to Newcastle. It's about 10 minutes drive away. My granddad would take her every day to see me or just stay over at the hospital when accommodation was available. So my parents were separate, more or less, like 3 or 4 months. And my dad came to visit. He had my sister at home, you see. So he'd have to get her obviously ready for school and go to work himself, do her evening meal, all the dad things you have to do as a parent to a 5-year-old. It's obviously a small child. So he'd obviously have to solo parent, and while mum was doing that, and obviously he's got a son in hospital 60 miles away or 50 miles away. He's, at one point it looked like I'd not even be here kind of thing. So I think it must have put a strain on their relationship, just with with everything. And I think with finances as well, because obviously my mum at the time, she was a waitress, a restaurant on an evening, and she obviously stopped work. She did get the job back. They kept the job open for her, but she would have had minimum income, less income. Dad worked full time, as I say, but I remember, it was, can I say, probably just slightly above minimum wage. So it's not like he was earning sort of a lot of money. So I do know that financially it would have been a struggle for them. And obviously the extra costs when it comes to sort of traveling and, my mum being in the hospital all day, every day, got them extra costs and, buying a cup of coffee or something to eat, a magazine, all these extra things. So, yeah, I think to work, they must have just worked as a team, and my dad looked after my sister and my mum sort of stayed with me kind of thing. But yeah, it must have been incredibly difficult for them.
It's really wonderful to hear how your parents came together as a family to support you and give you the gift of life. So just want to say to your parents and to all living donors out there, you are superheroes and you have my utmost respect.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Dee. It's, yeah, definitely.
So going back to what you said before about post-transplant being on immunosuppressants. So you've been on immunosuppressant medication for 30 years. What has been the impact of that on your life? What are the type of things that you need to be aware of as someone that's been immunosuppressed for so long?
So I think mainly keeping out of the sun. We're at risk of a very high risk, and I didn't even realise this until about 5 or 6 years ago, of getting skin cancer. I think there's something like a 70 to 80% chance. that you will get, you've been on immunosuppressants for sort of 20 years plus, you will end up getting skin cancer. So it is important to obviously wear sunblock if you go out in the sun and avoid the sun if possible. And it's not exactly enjoying life, and we're experiencing a bit of a heat wave at the minute. But I try to, wear a hat, stay covered up, wear sunscreen, kind of thing, vast majority of the time. And also, it can put you at risk of other cancers, unfortunately, which aren't as common, but you've got a higher chance than the general population on average. So, in that regard, I would say that anybody, I think certainly when you get to a certain age, like middle age, but I'm 46. As you get into your sort of your 40s, 50s, and 60s, I think anybody knows anyway, any difference in your body, you sort of go to the doctor and get it checked out, sort of thing. But I think really important, you just feel more fatigued than usual, that kind of thing. It's, you go to your GP and then sort of more or less say what's going on and request a blood test and stuff. Because immunosuppressants, they can, especially one that I'm on, it's called azathioprine. Obviously, they all work slightly differently, but I think generally your immune system's suppressed for decades. It's not going to do your body that much good in the long term, unfortunately. So you are more susceptible to cancers, especially blood cancer as well, leukemia. So, and also sort of like your bone mass can deteriorate. So I think it's supposed to have a bone density scan every sort of 2 or 3 years post transplant. I've not had one for 20 years, so I should probably get one. But yeah, so they can really weaken your bones and that kind of thing. And it worries me, obviously, that I've potentially got all this to look forward to in the next sort of, hopefully, a long time to come. But just being aware that, unfortunately, it's a double-edged sword, on this medication is keeping your kidney healthy, at the end of the day, saving your life and certainly your quality of life. But they do come with, as well as the short-term side effects that we discussed earlier, you've got your long-term side effects that, you just need to be aware of. And I don't think for anybody to sort of be worrying about and stressing about it. Because as I say, I put everything out of my mind to do with kidney stuff. Take my tablets, don't even think about what they're for. I might think about it a little bit when I'm going to the next hospital appointments coming up, that kind of thing. And I'm active on like Facebook groups and stuff and comment on people's posts and that kind of thing and be supportive. But don't let it. I've never let it take over my life or control my life in any way, if that makes sense. I mean, I think that's the best, certainly I found the best way for it to be. But yeah, these medications, they're a godsend, but obviously, as I say, they are a double-edged sword, unfortunately.
I'm glad that despite all the challenges, that ultimately it's given you a new lease of life and given you a healthy life, and long may that continue.
Thank you so much, Dee. I'm just grateful to be sat here healthy through the last 30 years with a healthy kidney and been able to live life to the full these last sort of 30 years. And some people might be a little bit appalled by that, but I just think life's for living, if you know what I mean. Take them chances, take them risks. That's my opinion and my thing anyway. And I mean, at the minute, I'm going every 4 months. My renal appointments, I go to Sheffield now, hospital. So, yeah, so it's life's good, and I'm very, very lucky as well.
So I know that you're active on social media. What are your handles for anyone that wants to give you a follow?
Yeah, of course. So on Instagram and Twitter, it's the same handle. It's Is It Still the 90s? And the 90s is 90. So it's like, Is It Still the 90S? And on Facebook, it's my name, Kevin Moulton, Malton. I am active in various renal transplant and renal support groups on Facebook. I like to have a look through and see how everyone's getting on. Yeah, so that's where I am.
Okay, so saying those handles again. So it's still the 90s on IG and Twitter, and Kevin Moulton on Facebook. But as always, I will put the links to those in the description box for anyone, so you can just click on and give Kevin a follow. And just to add on to that, the 90s was the best decade. I said it, I will stand on that forever. The 90s was the best decade. Just putting that out there. I just had to add that. What final word of encouragement do you have for the listeners?
I think keep going, don't give up. We're all at different stages. Some of us have had transplants that have worked extremely well. been lucky enough. Some of our transplants aren't doing so well. Some people are waiting for a transplant. Some people are seriously ill with renal failure. Just keep going. Every day is another day on this earth. We can keep going, and whatever life throws at us, we can beat it. We all support each other. I'm sure many of the listeners are in online support groups, whether it's Facebook or wherever else. We can all support each other and ask questions of each other, learn from each other. I learn so much from other people and things, and I think there's a lot to be said to supporting each other and sort of being helpful, because we're all here together. We're all warriors together, no matter what stage or where we are in the journey. So I'd say just keep your chin up, and it can be a long road. I know it can, but you'll get there.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that you will help so many people by sharing your story. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Dee.
Thank you for listening to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. And don't forget that you can contact me on social media using the handle Diary of a Kidney Warrior. Please do subscribe to the podcast, and please do tell a friend. New episodes of this podcast are released every Monday, 12 p.m. on Affinity Extra. Until next time, take care and choose to live.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.